In our corporate headquarters, we have framed Carhartt jackets, and these things are just beat to crap. But they're framed along with a letter that said, "This was my grandfather's. For 40 years, we could never get him to wear any other coat, and now that he's gone, we think you should have it back." In a perfect world, in my perfect world, data comes before design. And that's really where we're moving now, is to get that data as far up in that process as we possibly can.
And you have to be able to look at data and understand it and be humble enough to say, what is this telling me? Not, I want it to tell me something.
We started to realize what we could utilize those benchmarks to actually predict what we think a proposed component would do in the future.
What if you could predict how much money a homepage design would make even before you built it?
Well, that sounds a little bit like magic, but I'm telling you it's not. It's just data.
Exactly. And today's guest, Bruce Shields, joins us to explain how his team at Carhartt is doing just that.
And you probably know Carhartt for their legendary workwear. Jackets, belts, they last for decades. Farmers, builders, woodworkers swear by them, but Carhartt's also turned into a global digital powerhouse.
Now, Bruce leads Carhartt's UX and front-end development team, spanning 9 different time zones from the US to Amsterdam. His crew runs everything from design comps to personalization campaigns to optimization experiments.
And Bruce has a simple but game-changing philosophy. What we all want to do is data before design. No more gut-feeling redesigns. His team built a benchmarking system using 2 years of behavioral data, scroll depth, clicks, conversion funnels. This lets them model homepage performance before a single wireframe is approved.
Which means they're not just building pages, they're predicting revenue. If you've ever relied on instinct to make digital decisions, this episode will change the way you think about design.
We get into Carhartt's viral TikTok moments, like what happens when your customers are both ranchers and fashion chic hipsters, and why sometimes more clicks, not fewer, actually create a better user experience.
Bruce reminds us, as we often talk about, frictionless doesn't always mean faster. Sometimes it's about the right pause, or the right click, or the right journey.
So grab your headphones. This conversation is packed with insights you'll want to steal for your own playbook.
Welcome to The Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Paladino.
And joining us today is Bruce from Carhartt. Bruce, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Bruce, for those who aren't familiar with Carhartt, give us the elevator pitch of what the company does.
I would say Carhartt is the preeminent manufacturer of workwear. So anybody who comes to your house and fixes your plumbing or builds things, farmers, ranchers, they all use our clothing. Tend to think of it more as a part of their work kit or their work gear rather than their clothing. Very, very durable. Company's been around since 1889. And interestingly, the founder, Hamilton Carhartt, did something really smart in 1889. He did what I would call the first sort of user experience research. Started out, trying to compete with Levi Strauss. That wasn't going real well, and ended up talking to railroad engineers about the bibs that they were wearing and asked them what did they need. Created that project, and that launched the entire company.
I'll tell you, I got a Carhartt belt 12 years ago. It's the best belt I ever have owned. It's absolutely perfect. One piece of leather, exactly as you expect, never worn down. And I'm a woodworker too, so I'm constantly using it in that way.
Yeah, it's very much known for durability. And one other quick story, in our corporate headquarters, we have there's these framed Carhartt jackets, and these things are just beat to crap. They have duct tape on them, there's threads coming off of them, the zippers don't work, but they're framed. We have I think 4 of them, along with a letter that said, "This was my grandfather's. For 40 years, we could never get him to wear any other coat. And now that he's gone, we think you should have it back.
So help us understand what priorities your team is focused on.
So I have a very diverse team, actually. We've recently spun up what we call a digital center of excellence. And one thing that people don't, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't realize, is that Carhartt is actually a global company. All of the front end development falls under my group. So I have developers sitting in Amsterdam, as well as several different parts of the US. There are a total of 9 different time zones in my team. And that's all of the marketing content that gets put on the site. We're responsible for creating and testing, QAing, all that. In addition to that, I have a UX design function, a designer who does all of the wireframing on the site, does all of the production comps for any of the features that we're enhancing the site with, as well as does our user testing. So we have a very robust testing program where we test everything from future comps to current state to preferences, right? And then I also have a personalization specialist. That person is responsible for spooling up all of our personalization campaigns. And then I have an optimization specialist who's absolutely fabulous. His name is Josh. And he's, what we're talking about today, he's the one that came up with the idea of benchmarking marketing assets. So it's a very broad team, does a lot of stuff in a lot of different time zones.
So talk about your approach to UX, the difference between design and data and kind of how they align.
I will say when I got to Carhartt, it was what I would call a fairly low maturity in terms of UX. UX pretty much was synonymous with front-end design or front-end dev. It's taken a fair amount of work to get people to the idea that UX is much more about how people interact with your site. What are they trying to do? How are we getting them to what they're looking for? Do we even know what they're looking for? And in most organizations that begin, on that low maturity level of UX, they're looking at design as gut feelings, or this has worked in the past before. But even those decisions, they're generally not basing on what I would call good data, right? Our total revenue for that was X. There's a lot that goes into that revenue number, right? Time of year, seasonality, what else was happening in the market, all of that good stuff. In my perfect world, data comes before design. And that's really where we're moving now, is to get that data as far up in that process as we possibly can. If you are making design decisions based on gut feelings, I'm not going to say you're not making good decisions, but you don't know whether or not they're good decisions.
I think something that resonates with is trying to realize that there's a lot of bias that exists. Even if you're analyzing data, you have to recognize your bias and recognize that when you're looking at it, if you're simply trying to prove that you're right, you're going to. And you have to be able to look at data and understand it and be humble enough to say, what is this telling me? Not, I want it to tell me something. And I've seen a lot of pitfalls in that regard too, even being data focused, but still operating like what you're saying, where it's gut feel. They go after their gut, they prove it with whatever data set they want, and they massage the data however they want. And then it's just creating the exact message that they would have said in the first place anyway. So I've seen a lot of abuse with that. So how do you prevent from that happening inside Carhartt?
So that has happened, right? That early days, that was definitely, people were looking for testing to confirm their bias. That's absolutely, and that's human nature, right? We believe a certain thing. We know we're right. We want to confirm that we know that what we know right is right is right. And I just said right like 5 times there. So
it was great. I loved it. It was the right way to do it.
Yeah, of course. The nice thing about Carhartt is the culture is such that there aren't a lot of big egos, right? There are a lot of very smart people. At times, there are people who are very convinced that they're correct in the way they want to approach a problem. but there aren't big egos in that I've seen in other organizations where, we're doing it my way and I'm not going to listen to anything else, right? So there is a hunger for data, right? So it has become, over the last, I'd say 4 years, very common in discussions about options, whether it's, week to week pivots or longer term, for someone to ask, have we tested that? Do we have data on that, right? So I think the first thing you need to do is get people used to the idea that using data can be more effective than using your gut. So it can be it can drive more revenue, it can drive more engagement, it can drive more brand interaction, getting people used to that idea. And then there is an initial phase where you have to deal with that confirmation bias testing, right? People are going to come and say, I know that this is the correct thing. I need some data to confirm it, right? So one of the things that we've done is really underscore the fact that a failure is a success. If we get to a result and it's not what you want it to be, well, that's good, because that means we're now closer to the truth. And we're now closer to something that will actually work and move the needle. So, and I think one of the main things around that is most people, I'm not going to say all, but most people do not come to work every day thinking, I'm going to do a crappy job, right? Most people come to work wanting to do good work. They want their work to matter. They want to be part of something bigger than what they are. And you just have to show them that by testing, you're helping them do that.
Can you share an example of a time when you went into, say, a UX change with one expectation, the data told you something completely differently and sort of redirected you or saved you from going down a path?
Yeah, so we actually have re-platforming our D2B business unit. It has a grid ordering system, which, you're not ordering one t-shirt, you're ordering 50 t-shirts in various sizes, right? It's a fairly complex functionality in order to think through all those variables and understand what people may need when something's out of stock or they don't have the color you want, that kind of thing, right? We had, some of our leaders that were like very convinced that a grid style, like a table style was the right way to go. My designer and I looked at that and said, I'm not sure that that's going to work for us. So I pulled him off of other projects, put him on that for 2 weeks. We did a whole bunch of testing. I think we had like 400 respondents for that series of tests and came up with a very different design. But we were able at that point to show those leaders that this is how it tested. In mobile, your idea wouldn't work. And 50% of our traffic is in mobile on that specific platform. So you have to take your experience and intuition and then test it. Because it could easily have come back to say, well, that is the correct way to go. My bad, let's do it. And you have to have people who are willing to accept data results.
That also reminds me, at Home Depot, we had just a general philosophy of like parity across the board. When I first joined Home Depot, it was all about mobile parity because desktop was so much better than mobile. This was, 11 years ago. So this was relatively early on in the sequence of explosion of e-commerce online, but not super early. But one of the big biases that it kept on coming up was B2C was like B2B, or really it should be the other way around. B2B is like B2C. Your business user and what matters to them is the same as a consumer. And it's so fundamentally not, because the person that's buying, especially at Home Depot, and I'm sure this is similar in your world, but the person that's buying is someone that's being told to do something, not the person that's actually in charge of the money. And so they're told, go buy, 3 pallets of brick, and they go buy 3 pallets of brick. So what experience do you have to give them to make sure that they continually come back to you? It's about competing with the efficiency of being able to recomplete that purchase more than it is about some other aspect of like rich content, this or all of that, like being able to recall back to your specific account and all these little finite differences, and being able to approach a specific test to the user type is so fundamentally important as a result. And I think that's a lot of what you're talking about here with your table example. Is you really need to figure out what your users are doing. And if you're not actually approaching your user correctly, then you're not fundamentally approaching your business correctly, because that's exactly those need to align.
Different user bases have wildly divergent user motivations, right? So if you think about an e-commerce experience, you're on e-commerce, you're buying something either for yourself or, typically somebody in your family. You're very familiar with that person and their needs and wants, and it's a pretty direct process. You think about a buyer for any kind of B2B experience, right? That person is buying for maybe 100 other people that they don't even know, right? And when you think about that for apparel, then that is such a personal item, and how it fits is such a personal item, that it really complicates the process, right? So in our B2B business, we think about things like size conversions between men and women, because our assortment isn't as large in women as it is men. So a lot of our people will purchase men's products, t-shirts, for women. So we have to provide them a way to say, if I want this t-shirt to be my uniform, I need to be able to convert this to women who might be on my crew. So big differences, yeah.
Hey Nick, remind me again, how much money can a retailer lose if their site is just 0.1 seconds slower during Black Friday?
Millions. And I'm not exaggerating. We've seen it in the data.
Which is why we've pulled together the 2025 Black Friday Cyber Monday Performance Playbook.
Yep, and that's real tactics from top retailers, includes core web vitals, performance budgets, checkout speed tips, and more.
If you're prepping for Black Friday, you need this. It's free, ungated, and honestly,
could save your holiday revenue.
Download it at bluetriangle.com/ebook. Or we'll put the link in the show notes. So one of the things you talked about when we chatted last time was how you used 2 years of homepage performance data to identify patterns and build predictive models. Walk us through that, because that was fascinating.
Yeah, that was actually my optimization specialist, Josh. He comes up with these fabulous ideas sometimes. And I have a weekly one-on-one with him where he'll say, I want to do X. And it's usually like, wow, that'd be really cool. Go do X, right? In this case, it was, we have always benchmarked our marketing assets using financial data like year over year, that kind of thing, right? Like keeping in the same fiscal year or keeping in the same promotion window. But that's the extent of the nuance, right? So it's this brought in X thousands of dollars last year, must have done pretty well. So let's do it again this year, right? And I think a lot of organizations do that, right? They're trying to get to where they can benchmark a specific, type of banner or component, right? But when you take in interaction data, and by that I mean specifically click and scroll, in both desktop and mobile, you actually have a whole bunch more levers there. So he went through and took 2 years of data, pull it out, put it into spreadsheets. And what we wanted to do was get to a benchmark for a specific type of component. So think, a 1-up versus a 2-up, a home hero versus something lower on the page, or what we call a product pack, a banner with products, those kinds of things. We wanted to create a benchmark for where that was on the page, because we know that scroll depth does affect how many people actually see something, right? And we also wanted to take into account seasonality, right? So I think it's probably pretty true on most sites, but on our site, the user behavior starting in November switches wildly from what it is during the rest of the year, right? So you can't benchmark a holiday promo versus a non-holiday promo. And the same is true between a national promo, say our force promo, and just a regular time of the year. So he took all of that. We created a calculated statistic, which has been really, really useful. We call it the interaction rate. So it is the number of people who clicked on that component divided by the number of people who actually saw it, and that is governed by scroll depth. So during a non-promo time, most places are probably pretty lucky if you get 25% of your user base after you get down a couple of screens, 1 or 2 screens on your homepage. That means that available pool of people who could have clicked on that is much smaller than the total page traffic, right? So looking at that, we were able to see patterns where, let's say there's a sweatshirt component that is below a outerwear component that's above it, right? Now you would expect, because that's lower on the page, it would get fewer clicks, it would have fewer KPIs. But what we started seeing immediately was there were certain components that no matter where you put them on the page, they did well. There were certain components that no matter where you put them on the page, they did not do well. And there were certain components that had to be pinned at certain positions on the homepage. So through that, we went and developed benchmarks, meaning for a non-promo time, for a 2-up in position 4 on the homepage, we would expect this many people to see it. We would expect this many people to click on it. We would expect this many people to purchase because of it. And we would expect this conversion and this interaction rate. Then we realized that if we have that, then we can use that to make pivots in the moment. So if we launch a homepage, a week later, we look at all of those against benchmark, and if something is wildly underperforming, then we can immediately look at that and figure out why. And sometimes we don't want to waste that space, so we're going to take that component off. Sometimes we think if we put that higher on the page, it will do better. And sometimes that's the best we're going to do, right? So in the moment, every week, Josh will run a projection of what should the benchmarks for all of these components and compare them to see whether or not they're meeting or not meeting our benchmarks. And if they're not meeting our benchmarks, it gives us a lever, not quite real time, but in very quick in the moment, to be able to pivot. So that was step 1. Step 2 was we realized as we were going through this that if we have these benchmarks and we know what revenue we expected given the traffic that came to that page, like most retailers, we model out our expected traffic into the future. Now that's, how accurate that's going to be is an open debate. But there's a ballpark range, right? We know we expect X amount of people to come to the site during this period. Well, we started to realize what we could utilize those benchmarks to actually predict what we think a proposed component would do in the future. Once you have that, then you can start bringing that into the wireframing process. And, everybody has comps that they need to comp from last year. The page made, $1 million last year. It needs to make $1.2 million this year, right? We're able to model that out. So for every wireframe, my designer and Steve and Josh, they sit down together. Steve will say, these are the components I'm thinking about. Josh will model out that revenue. We know what the number is that we need to hit. And we're able to say, before anything has been decided upon creatively, we're able to say this will either hit that number or it won't hit that number. And if it doesn't hit that number, what else can we do to move that needle? So we're moving that predictive data, that modeling data, all the way into the wireframing stage. That's where we are now. Where we want to move it is all the way into the go-to-market strategy planning. So being able to say, if we're going to do this product story and we know what this revenue goal is, here's the type of play that we need to do on the homepage or on the site in order to be able to hit that, right? So if we have a large brand campaigns typically don't make money. They typically are brand awareness, right? Is that going to cannibalize so much revenue that we're not going to be able to make our comp? That's kind of where we're headed. That's where we would like to go with that data. But it's really all the same interaction data that sites have been gathering for 30 years, just applied in a pretty creative way. So I can't emphasize enough that was a self-directed project by one guy on my team. His name is Josh Kuchve. He's fabulous. And if anybody wants to hire him away from him, there's going to be a fist fight. So
I was just thinking, wow, you just gave his last name. I hope you just talked him up. The recruiters are already calling. So what metrics have turned out to be in your work have been the most reliable predictor of performance, do you think?
All journeys that don't include dropping people directly on a PDP, product detail page. One of the most reliable statistics that we keep track of is conversion rate between product listing page and product detail page, right? So you visited a product listing page, category page, and then you went to a product detail page. And we have found that one is very predictive of conversion and revenue, right? And we actually measure our cross-channel journeys that way. So we look at, for instance, paid social. You're coming into the site from a given social campaign. We have landed you on, let's say, a category page. What is the percentage of people that go from that category page to any product detail page? And when you think about the funnel, that makes perfect sense, because the product listing page is where you are trying to decide, I've got 100 products, are any of these relevant to me and my needs? The product detail page is where you're trying to figure out if this one is relevant to your needs. So that is an indicator that you're serious and you're moving down the funnel. You're not just in information seeking, right? So being able to track that and doing what we can to influence that is also a big lever that we use quite a bit.
So I would think if you segment your population into those that do go from product list to product detail and those that don't, there would be a slight intent between those two user bases that ultimately change that by default. Like if I am in market for a new pair of jeans and I land on a category for jeans, then I'm going to tend to click. If I'm not in market for one, how did I land in the first place? I don't even know. But let's say I land on jeans. So isn't there some element where it's just the population that's landing on the product list that's then driving that behavior, as opposed to the product list itself driving the additional view?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, new versus returning is another big segment for us, right? And we know that new users need more information. Like if you're a returning Carhartt user, you've been to the site 10 times, you're going to go straight to where you need to go, because our user base is so really loyal that a lot of our top internal search terms are our garment style numbers. Like K87 is one of our top search terms, right?
Wow.
It's so iconic, right? The people who are experienced, they know what they're looking for. They don't need you to tell them what a K87 is, right? The people who are new, which is a pretty big slice of our traffic, they need a little bit more direction. So one of the really kind of surprising things that we found in some of this cross-channel data is that one of the more effective places that you can land people if they're new to the Carhartt.com experience is on the homepage. Because the homepage does a really nice job of explaining kind of overall what we are, what our product offering is, and giving you options to drill down. If you land those people directly on a PDP, product detail page, that bounce rate is insanely high because they're only viewing one product and they don't get the full contextual background. The thing with data is there's always more to discover and there's always nuance, right? So you can cut any data set 1,000 different ways and find new and interesting stuff, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much.
So, Bruce, what's one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong, that you fundamentally disagree with?
I think the main one I see is that the lower number of clicks in a journey is always the best. The smallest number of clicks is always the best journey. Is not necessarily true. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it is. A fair amount of time it is, right? But I hear when we're proposing sometimes new functionality that's going to, like, a modal that will explain something. A lot of times the pushback you'll get is like, well, that's an extra click. Well, yeah, but what's the cost benefit analysis there? Like, yes, I might click, but if it gives me the information I need to make the decision, it's totally worth it, right? As long as you're not forcing people to do something that doesn't benefit them, right? So I would say that that's probably one of the bigger ones, because in UX, my standard answer for any question that anyone asks me is it depends. It depends upon the user, it depends on the site, it depends upon their motivation, it depends upon their goal. Like, there's not one right answer, which is, again, why I love it.
I actually made a journey optimization recommendation yesterday about reducing clicks. And it's funny that, like, this is perfect because in this case, they had a mini cart. It would pop up after you hit an add to cart on their PDP. And when that pops up, it gives you the option to add on or do whatever you want. But here's the problem. If you hit the go to checkout button, it would take you to the cart page, not checkout. I made the recommendation take you straight to checkout. And they said, we like that recommendation, except we've tested it and it dropped our cart size. Because what ends up happening is by driving them into the cart experience, which is a bigger experience of the same cart, it ended up providing the ability to continue to shop. And that continued shop is obviously valuable to them. Now, I still would advocate it would be brand building to give the option to go directly to actual checkout and not say go to checkout and then you just go into a cart instead. And it should be tested in a fundamentally different way, a longer arc. That was a very short arc. That was testing against the session, right? So the session, but if I test against the lifetime value of my customer, I would expect I would get more checkouts from an individual customer by giving them the ability to go straight to checkout. However, that's obviously much harder to do. So very, very fun, very topical. This was literally yesterday.
In that example, right, it's what audience are you talking about? Is it everyone? Is it your new users? Is it your brand loyalty users? Like, is there a way to separate that out? Is there a way to provide different experiences? Because ideally, what you want to get to is when someone comes to your site, they get exactly what they expect at every moment they're on your site. Now, that's obviously an ideal, but a new user who knows nothing about your site is very different than somebody who's been on your site 100 times. That is one of because I used to work for a company called 4C where we did a lot of heuristic evaluations. And, giving those recommendations that really are best practices, right? Like, really, you want to do that, taking people directly to checkout if you're telling them you're taking them to checkout, right? But you always have to test within your user base, because best practices are kind of general, they're meant to be one size fits all. And when I would deliver these results to clients, there were always instances where people would say, we tested that, and for us, it doesn't work. And my answer was always, data trumps. Data's the king.
So, Bruce, how can people find and connect with you? What's the best way?
Probably LinkedIn. I'm always available at Carhartt, but LinkedIn is probably the primary way. I do answer messages there. I've got quite a number of connections there, so it might take me a bit, but yeah, that's probably the primary way. One of the things I do believe in is giving back and mentoring. So if people are newer in the industry, I've always been open to talking to people and mentoring and giving advice.
Well, this has been a great episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Frictionless Experience. And if you've not subscribed to our newsletter, Frictionless, check it out at thefrictionlessexperience.com. Sign up to make sure you get our deep dive on the topics we cover every other week between episodes. And be sure to connect with Nick and me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Chuck Moxley, and Nick is
In Paladino.